What's up, everyone? Welcome to another lesson, another making of type of a lesson. Today we are doing a complete breakdown of this image, how the idea was born, how we brought it together, and how we thought behind it, the process of it. This lesson, more than any other, will be a journey. Not everything went according to the plan, but hey, that's the nature of doing sketches. And this one was exactly that, a 3D sketch, a chance to have some fun and test different limitations of AI and 3D at the same time. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. So it all started with Midjourney, with this image. It was a while since I worked on a personal project, and after seeing all the cool stuff being produced with Midjourney, I simply wondered, can I recreate something like this in 3D? And since I have never done anything winter-like, I figured a frosty cave or a cliff would be a good challenge. So I started exploring ideas. As it usually goes, I started exploring, looking for different inspirations, and jumping from one image to another. At first, I wasn't happy with anything. Compositions were simple, no intriguing geometrical DNA, no story, nothing that could get me excited to spend a whole day working on it. And you need to be excited about personal projects, But yeah, at some point I got hooked. One of the references had a small pop of red, and it kind of immediately clicked. I wanted a classic red and teal image, with highly saturated reds complemented by cyans and azures. As soon as I started prompting something like Moss Ice Cliff, Iceland, Polar Expeditions with some red and blue, I knew it was the right choice. Not only I was getting a cool color palette, but the compositions suddenly became much more intricate and dynamic. Out of dozens of images, I settled on this one, then I transformed it into this one. It's just putting the image in Photoshop and extending it vertically with Content Aware. Having some breathing space on the sky and additional foreground seemed much more interesting. So that was the frame I was going for, or at least I thought I was at that time. But anyway, I went with it and I started to identify what's cool about this image. In terms of geometrical core, I drew some lines on top of it. And as you can see here, there was some few interesting forms, interesting lines. There's also a nice depth. Also those colors like blue and red, they have the potential to intertwine. So yeah, that was pretty good. And at this moment, I felt like I had something on my hands. At this stage, I simply went to Quixel, to Bridge, which is now Fab. I just went there and checked what assets are available. It's kind of nice to have a head start to a personal project. If you don't have anything to start with, I think you can get bored real fast. So yeah, after typing ice, cliff, and snow, I knew we were cooking with gas. Moving on, I also wanted to have a hero. So I started generating characters in Midjourney, same approach as we did earlier in this training. So yeah, generating cutouts, and after literally a couple of minutes, I was pretty happy with the results. So the idea was simple. Someone just reached this summit and we have this epic contrast between him and the cliff. Little did I know at this point the idea was a disaster, but we will find out about it real soon, when Bart just looks at this image and tells me, without any sugar coating whatsoever, what's wrong with it, But anyway, I curated a character, ran it through Typo3D, and I had all the puzzle pieces I needed. Alright, so here we have a collection of those assets, and it's time to build the scene. I simply put my reference as a background, and I started blocking out the scene. First, I just figured out the dimensions, then I started putting some splines, and then putting 3D assets on top of it, those from Quixel. And here's a fun fact. If you don't know how high something should be, you can just go to ChatGPT and just ask. This is what I did. I asked for a rough height estimation of this ice cliff. I uploaded my reference. And yeah, there it was. So I set a box with the provided dimensions and I started working on a blockout. And yeah, you can see how it looks. After a couple of minutes, I was done. And at this stage, I generally thought everything was going well, but I decided to show the image to Bartek. And he pointed out one thing that kind of really threw me off. He asked me why those rocks in the foreground don't have any snow on top of them. And I was like, good question, Okay, so I started questioning all my past decisions. I need to have snow in the foreground, that's clear. But what else did I get wrong? And it kind of struck me that my story is kind of lame, it's lame as fuck, The dude standing on a rock like a douchebag, maybe we can slightly improve it, but yeah, I thought about something different. So I came up with this idea of a feisty woman here. I thought she could lead the exploration. I wanted her to generally be at the forefront and most importantly be in motion. And at the same time, maybe there could be like a polar base somewhere in the back. So yeah, literally within a half an hour, I had all the assets that could fit perfectly into the scene. In this specific case, Midjourney gave me more like painterly character first. But when I ran it through Magnifique, I got something realistic, something that was working in terms of color, the figure, the posture, and details, all of that. So yeah, I absolutely love the fact that she doesn't have a hat. Not sure if that's smart, but that's what I like. Nobody is going to tell me if she's like not a superwoman or anything. Okay, anyway, another part was the Arctic base. I generated a few assets, like tents covered in snow. I color graded them later to be red so that the color palette would be working nicely together. I also had some misses when I tried to create the sleds, but yeah, that was kind of cute, so I figured I would show it to you as well. And fast forward, this is what the scene looks like. You can see that everything is built to work within the camera angle. Sketches are never complete scenes, and I think neither are our commercial projects actually. But anyway, you can see the foreground with some additional details. We have the characters descending while holding a rope. Of course, if they took one step further, they would either slide down or, I don't know, you tell me. But anyway, dark humor aside, you can see their steps, and here on the side, there's some leftovers. There's this mysterious line of additional steps. No idea why this is here, but anyway, moving on. In the distance, you can spot the sleds being pulled. There's those lines, all that kind of stuff. And we also have the base with all the assets we generated before. People are having a good time here. They are vibing. Yeah, good vibes, good times. But yeah, as you can see, this sort of base probably, most certainly doesn't have any sense whatsoever. But hey, here we are. Moving on, you can see that this scene is lit in a simple way. We basically have the Corona sun and sky. For such sketches, the flexibility to tweak the lighting is super valuable. Sometimes we might need to change the sun's color, sometimes we might need to change the size, and this is more tricky with HDRI, so yeah, I find it more interesting to work with. And here, of course, we have the familiar box from the exterior scene. It's used to slightly cut off the light coming from the back. And yeah, let's see how it looks in practice. Let's run the interactive for a moment. This is how the render looks like. At this point, it looks kind of dark, but that's fine. And I want to share one interesting thing here. The sun is positioned in such a way to generate a nice play of light and shadow. It's pretty low, so the snow can actually cast some shadows. However, it's generally difficult to position the sun and have perfect deep shadows absolutely everywhere. And for this example, I don't like the fact that the stones in the foreground are a little bit flat. So to work around that problem, we can actually render multiple versions of this image with different sun positions and kind of Frankenstein both of those renderings together, It's a cheat, but no one will notice, and you'll see that in action in just a moment. Okay, so we open Photoshop, and you can immediately notice the render is a bit too dark for some reason, and I'm pretty sure I will fix that fairly soon. Starting from the beginning, we replace the sky first. Usually the one coming straight from the raw rendering has some areas clamped, and we don't want to lose any precious details in those areas. That's why we replace it almost every time. And I want to point out that the sky here is generated using Midjourney as well. I had a few alternative versions, and since this is a sketch, the goal is to maintain creative freedom. So coming up with some unique is pretty essential to this process. And yeah, I didn't want to rely on any skies from my database. I've already used them so many times, I'm familiar with them, and this approach can keep the things fresh and exciting. And since these clouds played a pretty important compositional role, it was crucial to find something interesting. The next step, as we mentioned before, we are just pasting the part of the rendering with a different sun position, focusing on the areas around the stones. There's some small adjustments, but the image works better afterwards. This is a neat trick when dealing with exteriors as well. When you have complex settings like a cityscape, it's tricky to find a position that perfectly illuminates all the facades, the foreground, midground, and background. And a simple solution is to use two separate images, two different sun positions, and then blend them together. Okay, next up, some color adjustments. The goal here was to have some sort of epic color palette, and here I will just go through all the layers. You can also look it up in the PSD file provided. Since it was a creative process, those operations are quite random, I guess. We'll see if this makes sense or not. Usually those operations target elements that are like either annoying or maybe doesn't make that much sense, or some fixes. So yeah, right now we are just like jamming in Photoshop, just trying to make this image better little by little. We have some color adjustments. We have the cyan added. I think it helps to unify the colors. I brighten the image a little bit, add more depth to it, some vignettes. Fewer color adjustments here, nothing crazy at this point, as you can see. Moving on, something we've discussed a long time ago in this training. We use Firefly to remove the so-called CG look, to break this look, especially in the foreground. You can see that it's super easy, really like a monkey brain thing. You can mark areas and type in snow or moss, and it will fix wherever the assets are like janky or something like this. It's nice to enhance those elements and boost some production value. But if you really like, you can go back to 3D. At this moment, I think Firefly can handle things much more efficient. So yeah, lastly, Pass and Magnifique. There's nothing special here, just running the whole image. I see that this is the overall pass. We have our standard settings, and just as a reminder, there's always one fidelity pass with creativity at 3 and HDR at -1, where we keep the consistency. And apart from it, we always do something more loose, like where we do 4x upscale on a half resolution image. We can take the best out of two worlds and blend them together. More on that in the first chapter of this masterclass if you have missed it before. But anyway, I removed some bits and add some glaciers. There was an element that looked quite poor in 3D, so I could generally improve it. And that's the whole secret, you know? That's the whole effort. Or is it? I still had one thing which was annoying me, and maybe you can guess it, maybe not, but yeah, maybe it's nothing. But I wasn't happy with the cliff. While the wall looks kind of cool, especially in the distant areas, it's based on Quixel assets and doesn't quite resemble the glacier that kind of, I don't know, inspired me in the first place. So it feels more like a frozen, flowing ice, something that looks like a frozen waterfall. And yeah, just to satisfy my inner critic, I did a couple of tests. I need a sense of closure. Maybe that's stupid, maybe not, but yeah, I know I can push it a little bit further. I just want to see. So first off, I ran the image with different creativity values in Magnifique, no prompts. This is how the image changes as we go with positive values. Little changes, but I think it's quite cool, I'm not gonna lie. At some point, we have the creativity at value 10, and something that previously clearly had this character of flowing ice now gets that blue subsurface scattering, typical to glacier, you know? We have these cracks, and I think it definitely looks more like a front of a glacier. And of course, at this stage, we also get various hallucinations. We might see the glacier in the sky and so on, but we don't care about it. We are just focusing on the glaciers, and we can always get those details for free. We can also consider using landscape models just to try it out. Again, this model will tend to hallucinate like crazy, but there are some pretty cool moments here and there. The foreground looks a lot more intricate, especially around the areas around the stones. It's always worth considering, especially when we are rendering images with large areas of landscape. I also did some tests with different resemblance values, and here, for whatever reason, it gave me also some pretty cool happy accidents. I could break from this image geometry, and what previously was a solid ice wall, now it was another type of a glacier. We also get this slightly different transitions between the ice and the rock here. So yeah, maybe we can use parts of the image if you would like to. Yeah, something to consider. And the last test was using prompts. that was yet another direction. That one was moving towards a freezing waterfall, and it's also interesting. It started to resemble icicles a little bit more. It feels like a frozen water rather than something covered in snow. So yeah, we get, again, this bluish subsurface scattering again. I'm not even sure what to think of it, but regardless, I think it's kind of a cool test. And believe me or not, that was the end. You know, that was enough. I didn't go back to Photoshop. I haven't gone into 3D ever since, into that scene. I'm happy with the snow scene, and next time an opportunity comes for a winter vibe, I will certainly go for it. That experience is just there. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little story, and I hope that you learned a thing or two. Thanks for sticking out to the end, and see you in the next one.